So today we're going to talk about two issues with the physical preparations, and tomorrow and the next day there's also more details. So we'll try to separate them to just the topic exactly. Yesterday in our Parsha and Rashi study, we talked about how there's 613 commandments that are from the Torah and another 7 from the Rabbanan, and one of the 7 of the Rabbanan is Netilat Yadayim. Most people understand that as Netilat Yadayim for the meal, but Rav Melamed understands it as well for Netilat Yadayim, washing your hands for prayer. And he calls it a mitzvah, so that's the context of what this is all about. So a person who prays must be in a state of purity. Of course, in the temple, they used to wash the Kohanim and the Levim's hands and feet. And I think that's where the Muslims got washing the feet, but we don't believe that we are in that kind of state of purity. So we just wash our hands. And one of my friends in Beersheba, he used to wash his own hands before washing the hands for the Kohanim, and I believe that that's also in the Shulchan Aruch. So it is therefore a mitzvah to wash one's hands before engaging in prayer. However, a distinction is made between a situation in which a person knows that his hands are unclean and one in which he does not know if his hands have been dirtied. And another nafkamina, which is brought in much later Achronim, Poskim, is that if somebody was wearing gloves, then if it's because of just the idea that he was dead, which is the next paragraph, not really dead, but in a state of where he gets a new soul in the morning and all that, then it doesn't matter if you're wearing gloves or even if you're wearing, a spacesuit. But if it's about cleanliness, then maybe gloves or such other measures will be allowed to skip the washing of the hands. So, for example, if one knows that his hands are dirty because he relieved himself or touched normally covered parts of his body which have become soiled from perspiration, he must wash his hands before praying. According to many poskim, he must recite a bracha on this washing even before Mincha and Marv, which is not our custom. However, the accepted custom is to recite a bracha solely on the washing before Shachrit, because when a person awakens in the morning, it is as if he is created anew. And the Talmud in another place says that sleep is like 1/60th of death. And they say that about a lot of things. They say that a dream is 1/60th of Nevuah. They say that I forget the other examples, but there's other examples of this idea of 1/60th. Regarding washing one's hands before Mincha and Marv, even one whose hands are dirty does not recite a bracha, according to the Rashba, who was a student of the Ramban. In any case, according to all opinions, a person who dirtied his hands is obligated to wash them before he prays. The Chatchila, he should pour water over his entire hand with a vessel. However, if he does not have a vessel, it is sufficient that he rinse his hands with water from a faucet, and that's another difference between washing before bread and washing for tefillah. Washing before bread must be a vessel. The Shulchan Aruch even went out of its way to explain that you're allowed to have a goy or a monkey or an elephant who is trained to wash your hands. So it obviously cannot be directly from a faucet. But we have to also remember that when Talmud was written, there was very few places where there was indoor plumbing and running water. And when the running water was in those places, it was always brought from an aqueduct or something like that. So the original force was still from Hashem, not your own hands. But again, this is related more to washing the hands before bread and not washing before prayer. In order to wash his hands before praying, if there is no water close to him, he must trouble himself and walk up to the distance of a mil, which is approximately a kilometer, 0.6 miles. However, if he is walking, the designated time for prayer will pass, or he will miss the opportunity to pray with a minion. He can rub his hands with sand or on his clothing. The Gemara again brings a different example, which is leaves, especially leaves that are wet from dew or rain in the morning, because that's definitely water that is your own, opportunity to clean your hands in order to remove any trace of dirt from them. And then he may pray. Just one last detail about this, which is also relevant to washing before bread. If a person is a painter or some other occupation that the hand will always be dirty as long as it's not dirt that stinks or something like that. It's not considered a chatzitza. So if a painter has paint on his hand, he doesn't have to put his hands in turpentine and make sure that there's no trace of the paint, because this is just the idea of preparation for prayer. And obviously, if he's not in that occupation, he doesn't mind if there's paint spots even on his clothing. So that's the context again of what this law is about. Regarding someone who does not know if his hands are dirty, since he doesn't remember if he touched the parts of his body which are normally covered, the poskim are divided as to whether or not he must wash his hands before prayer. Hence, if there is water available, he should wash his hands. However, if there is no water near him, he does not need to wash his hands, and he may rely on the poskim who maintain that it is only necessary to wash one's hands before prayer if they are unclean. To be certain, one should rub his hands on his clothing or something like that. And I'll just again say that if somebody is in a mentality, which we call today obsessive compulsive, that they always clean their hands, obviously their hands are not dirty. But most people don't remember if they scratch their head or if they, men are sometimes gross and they scratch their underarms and other places where it's definitely not clean, and they don't remember doing it because it's so natural for them, and so it's really a good thing to wash your hands before prayer, no matter what, unless you really paid attention and it was careful not to have such concerns. And last paragraph in this section, concerning one who relieves himself, washes his hands in his house, and afterward is careful not to touch the parts of his body which are normally covered, and then goes to synagogue, he does not need to wash his hands again before praying. Similarly, if someone who arrives at synagogue to learn and pray washes his hands before learning and is careful not to touch the parts of his body that are normally covered, because normally if you're in a Torah class, you would not do that, it is not necessary to wash their hands again before praying. And so, as part of the physical appearance and preparation, we'll just do one more paragraph that talks about dress, and then tomorrow and the next day, there's a few more details about the dress. So today we're just going to talk about kippa and a belt. A person must prepare himself for prayer, feel awe towards God's majesty and glory, and be happy that he is about to stand before the King of Kings in prayer. This should also be apparent in his dress. One's clothing should be respectable, fitting for one who stands before the king. And we gave a different example of prime minister or president. And so our custom is to wear a kippa, and I don't think that there was any king in the past, non-Jewish king in the past, who was offended by us covering our hair. But when people used to wear hats, which was, I guess, ended around the 60s or beginning of the 60s, obviously you would take off your hat when you were meeting before the king. But as Jews, we always believed in covering our heads, especially for men. So he's going to talk mostly about men here. Men are obligated to cover their heads while praying, while reciting the names of Hashem, and before entering a synagogue. However, in practice, based on the custom accepted in Judaism, men are careful to wear kippah all day long in our community, not because of anti-Semitism. Most of the people in town do not wear kippah in the street. They just didn't get used to doing that, but again, it's based on what is accepted and not accepted. But everybody, when they come into the shul, they put a kippah on immediately. In any case, the obligation to wear a kippah while praying, when reciting God's name, and while in a synagogue is greater, for it is rooted in law and not just in custom. And this is something that may be repeated many times afterwards. It's what's called minhag Israel dinu. So the custom of the people of Israel even though it originated as a custom, it is now a mitzvah, it is now a law, and that's how we should follow it. Additionally, although there are those who say that single women must also cover their heads while praying and reciting brachot, it is customary for women not to be strict about this, and that again shows us what kind of, I'm not going to say political, but like we are a lot more modern and understanding of the different customs than being strict like what used to be in the time of Talmud. And I'll also remind you that during the Talmud there was almost never a women's section in shuls because they were so crowded for space because of the different laws of the different countries, and so it wasn't even a question. The second preparation is one should wear a belt while praying. The belt creates a division between one's upper body, including the head and heart, and one's erva, the nakedness. In that regard, prayer is superior to other matters of sanctity. For concerning other matters of sanctity, it is unnecessary to wear a belt specifically, rather than any separation between one's heart and one's nakedness is acceptable. The Kohanim did wear a belt, but they also covered their nakedness with breeches, what the British today would call pants, which is underpants, but most people did not. So anybody coming into the temple, as long as they were covered, they didn't have to wear a belt. Only the Kohanim had a belt. Therefore, anyone wearing underwear has a divider between his heart and his erva. However, out of respect for the prayer service, it is a mitzvah to wear a belt. Again, the word mitzvah here is something that we learned from the prophets, so it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And for that is a respectful way to pray, as it is written in Amos, Israel, prepare to meet your God. In Hebrew, it's Hikon Likrat Elohecha Israel. But I looked at that chapter this morning, and that chapter talks about how Hashem says that unless you really want to come to me with all of your heart and with all of your mindset, then really don't, because he was accusing them of other behaviors, and the previous verse actually says that we almost were destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. So we'll just end with this. Nevertheless, someone who normally walks around the whole day without a belt need not put on a belt before praying. So I'll stop the recording, but I'll just continue a little bit